This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. No need to fear the end of summer, autumnal mists, or the imminence of a new school term. Feedback is back. And just to make sure you are fully alert and concentrating at the back, we start with a short general knowledge quiz. Ready? When was Laurence Olivier's film of Henry V released? Where was Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick born? And in which Hitchcock film does this perilous scene appear?
Can you get a grip with your feet?
I can't.
Kane, I'm getting a rope.
The answers and the reasons for the questions will be revealed shortly here on Radio 4, the home, allegedly, of curious minds. Well, perhaps not curious enough, according to Professor Stuart Hall. After hearing his ideas explained on Radio 4's landmark series The New Elizabethans, Professor Hall had a professorial rebuke for the production team.
Ideas are complicated, and the only claim to fame I could possibly have is having contributed to critical thinking over the last 30 or 40 years. If you can't deal with ideas, leave me out of it.
We'll hear the editor's response later in feedback. But first, a confession. Over the last few weeks, I have been screaming, hitting the ceiling, shouting with joy, and swelling with pride. The cause was, of course, the Olympics, and in particular, the golden achievements of UK athletes. Now, what do you think? Do BBC commentators deserve gold, silver, bronze or disqualification? With the Paralympics coming up, it's still a live issue. Here are some of your verdicts.
Hi, I'm Hugh Fowler. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to the BBC for the coverage of the Olympics. I wasn't lucky enough to get tickets, even though I tried, but for the last 2 weeks I've consistently felt like I've had the best seat in the house.
Hello, I'm Claire from Midhurst in West Sussex. I've never been moved to write to the BBC before, but I thought Chris Evans' Olympic broadcasting was absolutely stunning. I think during that fortnight, he became a national treasure.
But not all should win prizes. Many commentators have been far too partial, says Jo Anderson.
I would have liked to have heard more about the competitors from other nations, especially when they too had won medals, instead of just the prospects of the British team.
Catherine Haigh thinks the reporting started off on the wrong foot and was far too negative.
How really disappointing it was to hear the fantastic news of Team GB's first gold medal on day 5 of the Olympics, prefaced on Radio 4's PM programme by the grimly negative, after 5 days of waiting for medals, Britain finally, or words to that effect. Such a dismal attitude seems unnecessarily curmudgeonly.
But for feedback listeners around the globe, the main problem with the coverage was rather more basic. They couldn't hear anything at all. And it wasn't just Olympics news that was affected. For the first few days of the Games, several programmes which included Olympics-related content were unavailable to overseas listeners in their entirety. Anyone tuning in as usual to the Today programme, PM, even the Now show, would have heard this instead.
Due to rights restrictions, this part of the programme is unavailable. Due to rights restrictions, this part of the programme is unavailable. Due to rights restrictions...
Eric H. on the Radio 4 blog thought the BBC's motto needed adjusting as a result. Nation shall speak unto nation, except when censored by the Olympics. We had letters from France, New Jersey, Denmark, Hungary, Germany, Brussels, Ireland, Slovakia, Poland, Australia...
My name's Francis Humble. This is news, it's analysis, it's the essence of freedom and democracy. They have actually brought in a sort of censorship. If this had been cut out for political reasons, it would be a national scandal, we'd have questions in Parliament. But as this was commercial censorship, not a squeak of complaint or debate. Shame on you, BBC. If not even you stand up for the sanctity of news and comment, what hope is there?
In fact, after a few days, the BBC changed its position on what it calls geo-blocking. In other words, restricting the regions where programmes can be heard, and allowed non-Olympics-related news and other content to be broadcast. So what was going on? Here's what the corporation told us.
Unfortunately, there are some types of content which we are restricted from distributing overseas, usually because of sports rights. For this reason, geo-blocking was in place for the last 2 Olympic Games. This is an area where there are regular discussions about the details of the agreement. In this case, we're pleased it was agreed we could relax geo-blocking restrictions for some programming which was not specifically on sports-driven commentary services.
We've had more feedback about the Olympics, but this time it's less athletic, more linguistic. And if I'd been an Olympics commentator, I would have had nightmares about mispronouncing competitors' names. So many athletes, so many countries, so many verbal hurdles to jump.
The crowd booed and jeered as China's Wang Xiaoli and Yu Yang appeared to try and lose to Koreans Jung Kyung-young and Kim Ha-na, before fellow Koreans Ha Jung-young and Kim Min-jung then attempted to lose their match against Indonesia's Meliani Jauhari.
Des Moore is not sure the hurdles were always cleared.
I was a bit confused how to pronounce the name of the Chinese swimmer Ye Shiwen or Ye Shiwen. It's very, very confusing, and I would just like feedback to find out what it should be.
Well, we'll try, Des. When your email arrived, it prompted the familiar cry of beleaguered radio and television producers, call pronunciation. So we did. Jo Kim is a pronunciation linguist at the BBC's pronunciation unit. I asked her how much preparation her department did for the Olympics.
So we were asked by BBC Sport to look at over 200 names of prominent athletes.
Which is the most difficult name to pronounce, do you think, that even you look at and take a deep breath?
There was a Thai athlete who had about 36 letters in her name. And, of course, Thai has final syllable stress, so I think Thai names are quite tricky.
How about this Chinese sensational swimmer who won the 400 metres individual medley? She was only 16. She seemed to have come out of nowhere. The letters, anyway, of her first name are Y-E, and her second name is S-H-I-W-E-N. How should I pronounce her name?
So our recommendation for this name is Ye Shiwen. It's quite straightforward after you understand about Hanyu Pinyin. Hanyu Pinyin is a transliteration system that the People's Republic of China uses to Romanize Chinese names for English language texts. And unlike English, Hanyu Pinyin is consistent. So B-E-I is always pronounced Bei.
I'm sure I heard it pronounced Yu Shi Wen. A lot of commentators did that, I'm sure, didn't they?
I think because this athlete was a surprise winner, so you did hear quite a lot of inconsistent pronunciations like you or ye and then she when, because people will, of course, try to read a name the way it's spelt if they're not sure. If you think about the bass fish but the bass guitar, the consistency between spelling and pronunciation in English is very inconsistent.
Can I talk about the capital of her country then? OK, I better spell it. B-E-I-J-I-N-G. How should it be pronounced?
Our recommendation is actually Beijing. That's based on the Mandarin Chinese. In fact, I've asked one of our colleagues who's actually from Beijing to record the Mandarin Chinese pronunciation.
Beijing. Beijing.
And this is the same colleague saying the swimmer's name.
Ye Shiwen. Ye Shiwen.
So yes, our recommendation is Beijing. However, if you look through British English dictionaries, interestingly, there's an attested variant, Beijing, and it might be that this is an anglicisation that's being more and more accepted into English. Only time will tell, really.
My thanks to Jo Kim, who, by the way, is an expert in French, Italian, English, Korean, Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. Give her a gold medal. If you're wondering about how to say the tricky name of the Thai athlete Jo mentioned there, stay tuned. And if anyone else listening is in a pronunciation pickle, do contact feedback and we will once again call pronunciation. But before the Olympics and the torch carrying, there was, of course, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. To mark the monarch's 60-year reign, Radio 4 commissioned a 60-part series entitled The New Elizabethans, profiling those whose actions during the reign of Elizabeth II have had a significant impact on lives in these islands and helped give the age its character. Many have been enjoying the journey, although even they have questions.
I'm Stephen Games, and like just about every Radio 4 listener around the world, I imagine, I've enjoyed listening to James Naughty's series. What I'm not clear about is who actually wrote the 60 programmes. Does Mr. Naughty have the time? Or were the episodes written by the panel that chose the names, or by the producer, or has Mr. Naughty been brought in as the celebrity front, as it were, for some poor scribbler consigned to a box room at Broadcasting House, who did all the real work of raking through the internet and Wikipedia entries?
Hello, Feedback. My name's Liz, and I'm calling from Geneva. I just wanted to sound a note of praise for the new Elizabethans. The scripts are beautifully written. I just wondered, who is writing them? I know James Naughty is the presenter, but did he also compose them?
We hope to answer that question shortly. But not all listeners feel the series has been an unqualified success. And if you recall the general knowledge questions we set you at the top of the programme, here come the answers.
My name is Paul Freestone, and listening to the new Elizabethans about Hitchcock, it was stated that the chase sequence across the Statue of Liberty occurred in Vertigo. This is incorrect. It was in the 1942 film Saboteur.
My name is Anu Jain. I was listening to James Naughty's mini-biography of Salman Rushdie on the new Elizabethans. Despite its title, Shalimar the Clown is most certainly not one of Rushdie's children's books. It's in fact a disturbing meditation on modern terror.
Hello, I'm Dr. Rob Johnson from Northampton. I listened to the edition on Francis Crick. First of all, he said that Francis Crick was born in Nottingham, when in fact, of course, he was born in Northampton. We have a monument to him in our main shopping street. And second, he said that Crick was one of the 4 men who shared the Nobel Prize for DNA, but it was actually 3 men who shared the Nobel Prize, because there's a limit on the number who can actually share a particular Nobel Prize.
My name is John Holt. James Naughty stated that Olivier's film of Henry V was created in 1946. In actual fact, it was made in 1944. When I hear mistakes like that, I wonder how much else is accurate.
And one of the listeners who contacted Feedback to let us know what they thought of the programme turned out to be one of the new Elizabethans themselves.
More than half a century after he arrived from Jamaica to study at Oxford, at the very beginning of the 50s, Stuart Hall looked back and said that for the first time in his adult life, he was beginning to feel like a dinosaur.
Professor Stuart Hall is a cultural theorist, and after hearing the edition of which he was the subject, he got in touch with Feedback. When I spoke to him, I began by asking if he was proud to have been selected as one of 60 new Elizabethans.
Well, yes, I was. When I eventually heard about it, I was quite pleased, yes.
Did you think that your ideas were misrepresented?
Well, I thought they were misrepresented in the sense that it couldn't quite get a grip of some of the key ones. I mean, one of the things is that it did rather represent ideas, critical ideas, as having their importance in the 60s, and then after that the tide changed, and anybody who still believed in those old things is kind of fossil, and I don't really think that.
And you think that that's rather too short a view of history?
I think it's much too short a view. But I was more bothered by what I thought it contrived to do, which was to slightly misrepresent my views on some important topics. One is the question of culture and the economy. It sort of suggested that I believe that the economic determines culture, and I don't believe anything of the kind. I never have. And my work in cultural studies, which has been, since the late 50s, has been really a critique of the idea that the economy determines in that sort of direct and immediate way. So I was really bothered by that because it's been pretty central to the work that I've done.
The program also said that for people like you, the 60s were bliss, were they?
No, of course not. I had a lot of critiques of the 60s, actually. I thought it was too libertarian for people like me, and so on and so on. I mean, it's a very important time, but lots of my ideas were formed long before that.
Now, whether or not this program got it right or not, should they have come to you and checked with you what you thought and only gone ahead if you had agreed that their interpretation of your thought was correct?
No, I don't want a veto over ideas, of course not. I thought they might have checked if they were finding them difficult, and it rather sounds as if they did eventually, because they got some of them wrong. But I'm not complaining about access like that. I'm complaining more about the fact that ideas are complicated, and the only claim to fame I could possibly have is having contributed to critical thinking over the last 30 or 40 years. If you can't deal with ideas, leave me out of it.
And in the sense that you were in the 60s certainly very concerned with what you saw as the narrow definitions of Britishness, do you think the debate is still open and your contribution relevant today?
Yes, I would say that. My feeling is that the programme did sort of implicitly accept the current belief that multiculturalism is dead. And it seems to me an odd moment in which to think that, just after the Olympics, in which half of the Team GB is black, and in an economy where if China catches a cold, the United States sneezes. So, we are in a most interdependent, racially, culturally diverse world. And the notion that some small island conception of Englishness will survive all that intact is a hopeless illusion. I think it's just a joke. So I don't know that, that people who made the program believe that, but it did give that impression, kind of. That's another of the ideas that belong to the past, and we ought to put it away in the cabinet.
If you'd have been in charge of your, in a sense, own intellectual obituary in some ways, what would you have said? What would have been the message?
The message would have been a phrase from someone who's influenced me a great deal, an Italian called Antonio Gramsci. And Gramsci says, your guiding light as a critical intellectual is pessimism of the intellect. Tell it like it is. If it's bad, say it's bad. If it's not hopeful, say what it is. And then, out of that, optimism of the will. Out of that, look at where the breaks are, where the contradictions are, where new forces are emerging. History never stays the same. No political settlement ever lasts forever. And that is a more balanced account. But I'm afraid it doesn't, it takes time to kind of explain what that means.
Professor Stuart Hall. Andrew Smith is the editor of The New Elizabethans. I asked him who actually wrote the scripts.
James Nocte has written every word, 100,000 words, I believe.
From drafts provided by the producers?
Not from drafts, from research briefs. He's taken the whole responsibility for writing the series. We offered at one stage to do drafts for him, but he didn't want to do that, and they straight from him. He's been doing the Today programme and other programmes at the same time, and it has been an enormous operation, that's true.
Well, a number of our listeners do like the scripts very much, but there are some who have reservations about some of the facts. In fact, they say some of the facts aren't facts, that you got it wrong. Do you accept that you got it, or Jim got it wrong in the script?
Hands up, Roger. In those cases you mentioned, yes, we did get it wrong. We were fact-checking our scripts very carefully, but obviously not carefully enough in those cases. As I said, we've written 50 out of 60 programmes now have gone out, and there have been 5 or 6 complaints I think you've drawn to our attention, and there were factual errors, and they slipped through our net. And we apologise for that, and we're not pleased about it.
It is a serious matter, isn't it? We make mistakes on feedback. I wish we didn't. I'd make them, certainly. And as Rob Johnson says, some of these factual errors themselves are not that serious, but such facts are so simple to verify that they bring into question the skills of the researcher and the accuracy of the reporting in the rest of the series. Do you accept they are damaging?
I don't think they're damaging. I don't think they change the overall effect of the series, which is to try and capture these lives, to put them in the context of the times. Inevitably there's some compression, and inevitably there's a lot of writing and rewriting that goes on, and these mistakes did creep through. I hope that people don't feel that they've undermined their confidence in the series. I think that people have enjoyed this series. It's been chosen for Pick of the Week 4 times. Generally speaking, I think we've done a good job of capturing these people.
And if these programmes with mistakes in that you've acknowledged are repeated, you will correct them?
They're already corrected. They were corrected immediately for online use and for download.
Well, if we can move on from matters of fact to matters of interpretation, as you know, Professor Stuart Hall contacted us to say that he felt that his views were misrepresented, that you were talking to him about him as if his ideas were dead, finished, and had nothing to offer.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We have spoken to Professor Hall, and I'm sorry that he felt that we didn't fully capture his ideas. With regard to that particular point, I think that is more to do with drawing a line. We're drawing a line in 2012, and we're looking back to 1952 and saying how have these ideas developed and where are they now. And I think Jim, and it is Jim's authored view, and of course there are other views, and we fully accept that. Jim's authored view was that these ideas haven't taken off, and I think there is obviously evidence for that.
Well, it's not about whether they've taken off and whether they're relevant now, and Stuart Hall would obviously say they are relevant in terms of multiculturalism and so on. But there is accuracy. His most concern is this sentence from the programme. Even for many students and listeners who didn't share his Marxist economic analysis, beginning with the assertion that all power structures were products of capitalism and sustained by it, his work opened up fruitful territory. He says he doesn't believe that, and he doesn't believe, for example, that the economy is the key decisive factor in terms of culture. It's an important factor, it's not a decisive one. So he thinks you misunderstood him.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I think that came about partly from the compression of the series, trying to compress ideas of people as well as their background, where they came from, who they've worked with, into 11 minutes, which is difficult. And we're trying to draw broad themes as well as the individual story.
In those circumstances, would it have made sense to talk to him, Stuart Hall, not to obviously accept necessarily his own interpretation of his own work, but at least to talk through with him his ideas to make sure you got them right?
It might have been. We decided not to speak to people and try and draw a more distant view of people by looking at what had been written about them and what they'd said themselves, what they were public recorded as saying. So I feel that there is a nuance there that we missed, I think, in that particular area. But it was one section, I think, of this 11-minute talk, possibly even one sentence, and it was a result, really, of trying to compress the ideas into 11 minutes. And I think we may have got that slightly wrong. I do accept that.
I think the key thing he's getting at here is that there's a danger of putting people like him into boxes, and that we all should be a bit more open-minded intellectually, and also have some, perhaps, modesty when we make claims about the recent past. After all, was it Chou Enlai who said, when asked about the French Revolution, what he thought about it, he said, it's too early to say.
Well, I mean, that particular point, I think, is, as I've said before, is about drawing a line at 2012. And it may be that these ideas will flower and have more influence in later years. It would be surprising, perhaps, if they didn't. But at the moment, we're drawing a line, and Jim is trying to say where we are now, as well as how we got here.
Our thanks to Andy Smith, editor of The New Elizabethans. And in case you thought that Stuart Hall was not sounding his usual self, well, the answer is that it wasn't that Stuart Hall you were listening to. Confused? Well, here's the other one.
And welcome to a rather damp Swansea for round 2 of It's a Knockout 75!
The Oscar Wilde for sports commentators, the other, Stuart Hall, OBE. I suppose confusion was inevitable. Listener Karen Monaghan spotted that the Radio 4 website team, which has nothing to do with the making of the programme itself, chose a picture of the white It's a Knockout star to accompany the New Elizabethans text about the black Professor Stuart Hall. The website producer acknowledged the mistake and told us this was a simple case of human error and was quickly rectified. But did the professor mind?
I thought it was hilarious, to be honest, because when my kids were small, we used to watch It's a Knockout, and I once got a tax demand, which was for him, not for me, by mistake, and I nearly got heart failure.
Was it an impressive sum?
It was a very, very impressive sum. But so, in a funny kind of way, we've shadowed one another. I know exactly who he is, but I bet he doesn't have the slightest clue who I am. I
think you underestimate Stuart. Stuart?
The other Stuart Hall is very famous for what he does, and I'm famous for what I don't do, really. And I find it hilarious. I keep getting lots of letters from people asking me to spot a culture here and there, or a good bit of advice, and I always dispense it, pretending to be the other Stuart Hall. I'm grateful, really, because he keeps my name alive, and I keep his name going too.
And as a consolation prize for not yet being a New Elizabethan, we asked Stuart Hall, the sports, not the social commentator, to read our contact details.
You can write to feedback, PO Box 67234, London, SE1P 4AX, or leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard line charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or you can email feedback@bbc.co.uk. All those details are on our website.
My thanks to Stuart Hall and to Stuart Hall. And talking of mix-ups and mishaps, you may recall that during our last series we asked you to join something we called Operation Dropout, spotting any malfunctioning phone lines or interviewees disappearing in the midst of programmes. So, have there been any dropouts while we were away? Has Prince Harry lost his pants?
Well, obviously this morning, Jim Rogers, we saw Standard Chartered take a hit on bank shares, but do you think there could be more lasting damage to London as a financial centre? Oh, we seem to be having a few problems with the line there. Obviously, trouble going to Singapore. But let's hear now...
Good work, team. Stay alert. And now, before we go, this is going as well.
The Chris Moyle Show. National Radio 1.
Chris Moyles isn't the only upcoming departure from Radio 1, as The Breakfast Show is also saying goodbye to the sung jingle. The nation's number one, actually it's Radio 2 which is number one in listening figures, but never mind, is commissioning an all-new sound to go with their all-new breakfast show with Nick Grimshaw, who takes over from Mr. Moyles at the end of September. And the controller has given some cautionary advice to would-be composers. Please steer clear of sung jingles. Duly noted, but this did get one feedback listener thinking.
Please will you also eliminate, on Radio 4, the annoying background wallpaper of musical noises that now seems to be obligatory in trailers for future programs. Surely Radio 4, of all radio stations, is capable of using the human voice alone to promote its products.
Well, George, some of us need all the help we can get. And, in fact, over at Radio 2, they've employed the whole of the BBC Concert Orchestra for their new jingles. This has left us all feeling a little musically bereft here at Feedback HQ. We want to add a little melodic flourish to proceedings too, with your help, dear listeners. Following in the footsteps of Radio 1 and 2, we would like to invite your ideas for our first ever jingle. No musical ability required. Please get in touch through the usual channels. And finally, earlier in the programme we mentioned a Thai athlete whose name is well over 30 letters long. Well, we couldn't leave you wondering how to pronounce it, so here's the multilingual and very brave Joe Kim of the BBC Pronunciation Unit to show us all how it's done.
Prapawati Chiranratana.
I'll take your word for it, Joe. That's all from Feedback for this week, but let me assure you, I did write lots and lots of the script. Well, a bit of it, anyway. This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. No need to fear the end of summer, autumnal mists, or the imminence of a new school term. Feedback is back. And just to make sure you are fully alert and concentrating at the back, we start with a short general knowledge quiz. Ready? When was Laurence Olivier's film of Henry V released? Where was Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick born? And in which Hitchcock film does this perilous scene appear?
Can you get a grip with your feet? I can't. Jane, I'm getting a rope!
The answers and the reasons for the questions will be revealed shortly here on Radio 4, the home, allegedly, of curious minds. Well, perhaps not curious enough, according to Professor Stuart Hall, after hearing his ideas explained on Radio 4's landmark series The New Elizabethans. Professor Hall had a professorial rebuke for the production team.
Ideas are complicated, and the only claim to fame I could possibly have is having contributed to critical thinking over the last 30 or 40 years. If you can't deal with ideas, leave me out of it.
We'll hear the editor's response.
Heard more about the competitors from other nations, especially when they too had won medals, instead of just the prospects of the British team.
Catherine Haig thinks the reporting started off on the wrong foot and was far too negative.
How really disappointing it was to hear the fantastic news of Team GB's first gold medal on day 5 of the Olympics, prefaced on Radio 4's PM programme by the grimly negative, after 5 days of waiting for medals, Britain finally, or words to that effect. Such a dismal attitude seems unnecessarily curmudgeonly.
But for Feedback listeners around the globe, the main later in Feedback. But first, a confession. Over the last few weeks, I have been screaming, hitting the ceiling, shouting with joy, and swelling with pride. The cause was, of course, the Olympics, and in particular the golden achievements of UK athletes. Now, what do you think? Do BBC commentators deserve gold, silver, bronze or disqualification? With the Paralympics coming up, it's still a live issue. Here are some of your verdicts.
Hi, I'm Hugh Fowler. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to the BBC for the coverage of the Olympics. I wasn't lucky enough to get tickets, even though I tried, but for the last 2 weeks I've consistently felt like I've had the best seat in the house.
Hello, I'm Claire from Midhurst in West Sussex. I've never been moved to write to the BBC before, but I thought Chris Evans' Olympic broadcasting was absolutely stunning. I think during that fortnight, he became a national treasure.
But not all should win prizes. Many commentators have been far too partial, says Jo Anderson.
I would have liked to have